My name is Chris Peace. I represent the 97th House District, and today's House Republican Caucus press avail will focus on House Appropriations Committee recommendations to the governor's proposed budget, House Bills 29 and 30. Each week, our caucus has articulated a Republican vision for job creation and economic growth and plans to make government more efficient and effective. Each of these values is reflected in some way in the budget amendments adopted unanimously yesterday. As a new member of this august committee, I was proud to cast my vote in support of a structurally balanced House budget, which includes, among other items, providing additional funding for both our public schools and our local governments so that they can keep local taxes low, using one-time savings for funding non-recurring costs and minimizing the amount of new debt, providing full funding for the VRS contribution rates, reducing the burden on Virginia's businesses with fewer and lower fees, providing additional support to attract new industry and promote tourism, and investing in our colleges and universities. The subject matter presented today reflects a thoughtful, common-sense approach to budgeting and governing in a challenging economic climate. Now you will hear from distinguished members of the House Money Committee. We will begin with Majority Leader Kirk Cox to speak about the portions of the budget that he helped to craft.
Thank you, Chris. I always like being called distinguished. Thanks for that introduction. But if Chris Jones will stop laughing, this would be a better press conference. But I have two items I want to cover that in the budget, both near and dear to my heart. First, higher education. Last year, as you know, we unanimously passed the Top Jobs Higher Education Reform legislation. And I have to laugh the day that it passed unanimously. I thought it was one of the landmark bills, except for maybe Chris Jones's Restructuring Act. It didn't even make the paper. There was a great picture of us eating pizza downstairs, so hopefully today I'll do a better job. But that, of course, this year the legislation is providing the roadmap for higher education funding through the 6-year plan process outlined in the legislation, which I want to talk about in a second. Some of the highlights of the higher ed package this year: $42.6 million for enrollment growth. $5.5 million of that is for 1,700 slots at William & Mary, JMU, UVA, and Virginia Tech. And we sort of looked at the universe and went, what four schools is there the most demand? And those were clearly the 4 schools. So we have incentive money out there for them to grow those slots, which is, I think, absolutely essential. But we didn't want to do one size fits all. So what we also did was we put $15.4 million to improve retention and graduation rates. We've actually tried to look at the colleges in their 6-year plan and see what they had in their 6-year plan to specifically they thought would help with the retention rates, and we transfer those over into basically our package. So these are proven programs the colleges have said will help them with their retention rate. We also have money in for transfer students, because in some cases, just doing more slots is not the answer. It's doing more transfer students who have a great history of graduating on time, and also obviously will help those schools with our goal of 100,000 degrees. Second, $59.2 million for basic operations funding. This is your base adequacy. This will help obviously add new full-time faculty, operations and maintenance of new facilities, utilities, and increase library and technology costs. Bottom line here is ramping up base adequacy will help very much, especially with full-time faculty, which will help graduation on time rates. And finally, I really want to emphasize this one because we didn't say a whole lot about it yesterday. The incentive package we put together. A total of $25.7 million per year, $15.2 million per year from the general fund to be matched with $10.5 million per year of reallocation requirement up to 1% by colleges from their current funding level. And once again, we combed through the 6-year plans, which had a requirement to basically match up the top jobs legislation. What are you doing in the STEM area? What are you doing in these incentive pools, basically? And let me give you some specific examples of how we sort of did this in the budget. James Madison University. Basically, the language says they're to expand their nursing programs and existing programs in computer forensics and biophysical chemistry. Longwood, increase our use of distance learning to off-site campuses in Emporia, South Boston, Martinsville to expand nursing programs. UVA, Longwood, and Virginia State to establish a Center for Logistics Research at Fort Lee. If you look through the individual budget amendments, every university has a specific STEM initiative that we're incentivizing. We want them to put some of their money towards that also. So in higher ed, I think it's a unique package that has a combination of those types of things. Let me say one other thing on higher ed, and that is access and affordability. The House budget provides $14.2 million more to institutions and operating support by redirecting the proposed financial aid funding to a salary increase. And colleges told us we're going to increase faculty salaries through a tuition increase. One of our major goals is to keep tuition down. So our theory is with the base operation money, with what we've done is for faculty salaries, we should see tuition very affordable this year, for maybe the first time in the last 3 or 4 years. Well, I took way too long on that. Let me do K-12 quickly. We've given a lot of speeches on K-12. We had 2 or 3 major emphases on K-12. First of all, to restore the inflation in the non-personnel area. That's about $107 million. That goes to the school aid formula. It will help all school districts. That's the one that localities told us was the restoration they wanted the most. The other big item we have in K-12 is third grade reading. And as a teacher for 30 years, there's nothing more fundamental than that. That's the building block. You will get kids in 11th and 12th grade even without adequate reading skills, which really makes it very, very difficult. We are 100% fund in 2014 the third grade reading program. And I'm quickly going to, and we did some other very important things that I didn't get highlighted yesterday. We tried to address some specific problems in localities, and I want to call on Peter Farrell to discuss a little bit on one issue we did as far as Louisa County goes. And so, Peter, if you'll talk about that quickly in K-12.
Thank you, Delegate Cox. First, what he's speaking to is because of the extensive damage done in Louisa County from the earthquake, especially to their high school and one of their elementary schools, which was essentially condemned and cannot be repaired. They're going to have to build a new elementary school. Probably, the jury's still out, but probably a new high school as well. They lost 40% of their school capacity in about 15 seconds on the day of the earthquake. From August, they have a waiver, so they start before Labor Day. From August until about 2 weeks ago, they have been going to school 3 days a week for their middle school and high school students. I'd like to thank the Appropriations Committee, every member who's been approachable, and the staff to be helpful and understanding. And there is an amendment in the budget, in the House budget, for $2 million for Louisa County to use to reconstruct their schools. It is a great step and a great help to the county. I really appreciate it. The county appreciates it, and I really appreciate the committee having our back on it. There's $1 million in the Senate, so there will be some discussion as to the final amount, but I cannot thank the committee enough. They've been wonderful. The county is really going to benefit from it, and they should, because it was an extraordinary event, and it was an event that was not from mismanagement, for a number of years. It was an extraordinary event that took 15 seconds to take 40% of their school capacity. So I really, again, thank the committee for their wonderful work. And as a freshman, they have been nothing but approachable, accessible to everyone, freshmen or not. And I couldn't thank them enough. Thank you guys very much. And it's a great day for Louisa County. Thank you.
I want to take a minute to recognize Lacey Putney for his leadership. The judgment that he shows, the experience that he brings to bear in this process is certainly invaluable. He is a tremendous leader for our caucus and on the Appropriations Committee. I just want to recognize him for his leadership this morning. Next, we'll have Steve Landis speak to this portion.
As Kirk did, I want to hit on 2 main parts of the budget that I believe were important. One was addressing an issue that we heard from many of our members on both sides of the aisle, and that was dealing with the problems that our localities have encountered over the last 2 years. And one of them, there were 2 things that we really tried to concentrate on. One, we wanted to work better to fund localities across the Commonwealth, and we also wanted to plan for the potential budgetary hardships that our localities were dealing with related to the possible future federal reductions that we might see that impact different areas of the Commonwealth. First of all, the Technology Oversight and Subcommittee of Appropriations, basically over the biennium, will have $50 million fact fund as the governor basically introduced. But this will help ease the cuts that the federal government eventually will have to deal with from the standpoint of balancing their budget. This will allow the localities and the state to prepare in time to deal with that uncertainty, And it also, in the legislation, we have some guidelines on, at least from the House's standpoint, what we believe is important for that fund. The FACT Fund will aid localities that have been negatively impacted by BRAC. It will provide provision for federally mandated services. And more importantly, it's going to deal with economic development activities to help transition industries or businesses affected by the federal budget reductions and BRAC recommendations that may come. Obviously, that's targeted more towards our military and procurement areas and government contractors in areas of the Commonwealth of Virginia, especially Northern Virginia, the Hampton Roads area, and even in areas I know in Albemarle County, there are defense contractors and installations as well, in the area that I represent. We also, in the BRAC, you'll find language for an advisory committee. I want to thank the chairman for working with us on that and the staff, because we want to have the legislature be involved in how those funds are expended, and I think that's important. We also have included about $70 million in what were reductions to local aid reversions for our localities. As you heard Delegate Cox talk about what we were doing in K through 12 to assist localities and the additional funding there. This money will restore funding to localities that was reduced in local aid. That was $60 million each year in the previous bienniums. We also, again, I mentioned that, as Delegate Cox said, we want to restore what we're providing in K through 12. And just to emphasize again, it will be $138 million over the governor's budget for K through 12. So you can see we've really gone a long way to assist our localities in dealing with the hardships that they've encountered. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is what we're doing with economic development. We want to assist our localities. We also want to continue the economic growth that we've seen, and I think all of our members agree that jobs are still important and economic growth is still an area we want to try to target limited resources to. First of all, we're going to, I think, build on our economic development record that both the governor and the House and Senate have done. We want to maintain the fact that Virginia is the best state for business, and to do that, we'll have some business incentives, especially $11.8 million for the governor's Opportunity Fund, $500,000 for international marketing and business outreach. That is very important. Today, you cannot do business in a global economy without marketing your localities and the Commonwealth and the businesses that are in there across the world. So we're going to be doing that as well. We also have $4 million in a manufacturing-based development program. There was an incentive program set up by the governor that will help manufacturing. If you've seen the local figures, actually manufacturing is starting to see some increase and really turning the corner, but we need to do more to try to help them, and I think that will be a great asset as well. We also have $15 million in the House budget for research and development. That's critical to Northern Virginia, but also the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. Hampton Roads, again, Charlottesville, Albemarle, many parts of the state will benefit from that as well. And then last, for economic development, I want to emphasize again, we, I think for the first time in many years, are really concentrating on assisting agriculture and forestry. And that industry, that's the largest industry in the Commonwealth. We were able to provide funding for House Bill 766, which I carry, that creates the new Agriculture and Forestry Development Fund. And last but not least, I'll just hit on, we do have some additional dollars to continue to fund environmental priorities in the budget, and we don't want to forget that as well. So those are important areas, I think, in local governments and assisting them in economic development efforts.
And next we'll hear from Delegate Chris Jones, and then following Chris, Delegate Beck Ocean.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. As chairman of the Subcommittee on Compensation and Retirement, I get all the fun work, not really. I worked very closely with Chairman Putney and the Speaker the last several years as chairman of the subcommittee to do all what we can do to shore up the underfunded VRS system that we have. This year, as we did 2 years ago, Chairman's Bill 1089 in 2010, we've adopted a dual approach. We're trying to improve the funding status while at the same time making key reforms to VRS. First, House Bill 30 increases funding for VRS $367 million over the next biennium for the state's share of employer contributions to VRS. Second, House Bill 1129 and House Bill 1130, the Speaker's bills, work to improve and implement on a more structurally viable framework for VRS as we move forward. 1129 takes reforms from JLARC's report, trying to make some more structural changes to the benefits package that we offer. And 1130 is actually a defined contribution plan that we have put forward, similar to what was done last year in 24, Chairman. The House budget also includes provisions for a secondary reserve fund, which goes beyond the rainy day fund that we have, and also the new FACT fund, which is the Federal Action Contingency Trust Fund. This new reserve fund contains $42 million, and it will, because we remain cautious about the revenue projections as we move forward. And what this will do is, in fact, we meet our revenue projections through 2013. There's no adjustments downward, then there will be a reserve of $42 million to be drawn on to give a 2% raise to all state employees. This will include constitutional officers and the local responsible employees there. It has been 4 years to date, and will be 6 years almost by the time that raise will be received by our state employees. We work very hard in providing the services to our constituents. In addition to the FACT fund and the $42 million in the new secondary reserve fund, we will set aside another $300 million as a biennium to our rainy day fund. This will put us at $600 million by the end of the biennium, which will be about half of the pre-session balance that was in that fund prior to us hitting the downturn back in 2008. And as the members of Appropriations know, we drew on that reserve fund, the rainy day fund, to be able to dampen cuts to our local governments and to our citizens across the Commonwealth. Finally, in Health and Human Resources, we were able to restore cuts that were included in the introduced budget to about 200,000 of our most vulnerable citizens by putting $6.2 million back in the budget for clinics, for community health centers, and for dental services statewide. But about $1.3 million for the elderly citizens that needed community-based care and various support services. And I think most importantly, we put $66.7 million in the budget for our nursing homes and our hospitals, which will be matched by our life dollar amount, and will be supplemented by another $10 million to take care of our health care safety net. I think the most significant investment that we're making is the DOJ settlement that was I think, when we first got here back in January. We have added 340 new ID waiver slots, 450 new ID waiver slots over the biennium to take down urgent care waiting list, and 50 new ED waivers, and the $30 million that was included in the governor's budget. I'm very pleased to say, as I mentioned before on Friday, that the chairman, working with the subcommittee, HHR, allowed us to find dollars for another 250 slots on top of those mentioned. Another 200 waiver slots, ID waiver slots for the community to help bring down the emergency waiting list, the urgent care waiting list, and another 50 ED waiver slots as well. These changes will bring Virginia into compliance, DOJ, and providing higher quality of care for all Virginians. And I want to echo what was stated by Chris earlier. The chairman has provided this steady leadership from day one. We started meeting prior to session. Conferees and subcommittee chairman have met along the way to make sure that the budget that was presented yesterday is structurally sound and puts us in the best position to be successful going forward in very uncertain times.
It's good to be here this morning. I had to reflect a little bit as we were talking about earthquakes. I chair public safety, and I have to tell you that no way could we have anticipated that in the same week we were going to have a hurricane and an earthquake. And so a lot of our good work in public safety has gone a long way to making sure that emergency response was there for all of those things this year. And so this committee being very important for safety-related priorities, I was glad to be able to report that $7.4 million is included in the budget for sheriffs, $10.1 million for local and regional jails. In addition to that, we've put funds into our budget that provide for key legislative initiatives coming out of our caucus and the governor's agenda. This includes funding to cover House Bill 968, Delegate Bell's bill, which provides stiffer penalties for repeat drug traffickers. This requires imprisonment for 5 to 40 years for second-time drug traffickers and a mandatory minimum of 10 years for third-time offenders. We also were able to put in $2.9 million additional dollars to increase the number of probation officers following released sex offenders, and to develop a serious and violent offender re-entry program in Richmond. Additionally, to help our brave servicemen and women, we have continued our efforts to reduce the ratio of veterans claims agents as compared to veterans in the Commonwealth. Through the House biennial budget, we will reduce the veterans per staff ratio from 26,212 to 23,000. We want to ensure that those who have selflessly and ably served the Commonwealth are given the best service possible. The Subcommittee on Capital Outlay also included provisions for veterans, with $28.5 million for construction of a new Veterans Care Center in Hampton Roads. Additionally, Capital Outlay found substantial savings that will serve the Commonwealth's taxpayers, including $13.4 million in debt service savings in the Treasury Board as a result of lower interest rates and revised debt projections over the biennium. A more thoughtful approach to capital projects, many of which came to us through DJS, and SHEP. The governor's budget proposed 59 such projects, while our budget rolls those projects back to a more manageable 29 projects. Reduction in tax-supported debt by $96 million, bringing $240 million down to $144 million. We also had some pretty good amendments in our Transportation Subcommittee. $705.9 million in total transportation investment over the biennium to help improve and maintain roadways, particularly those in congested Hampton roads in Northern Virginia and along major highway corridors. Funding for Wallops Island and other cutting-edge space-based infrastructure development was also included. $67.2 million in general fund surplus that will go to transportation, $57.3 million of which will go into VTIB. All in all, I am grateful for the support of the entire committee in making sure that we had public safety monies here for the needs in the Commonwealth, and I as well would like to thank the chairman for his great leadership. Thank you.
Good morning. I was not supposed to be a part of this program, and when you do what I'm doing, you're more likely to mess it up. But I want to make a couple of comments. Ordinarily, when we are campaigning or attend most any function, when you walk in the door, somebody says, I might call on you to say something. Well, this young man came from California and struck it rich. On his mother's 90th birthday, he was searching for the appropriate gift, something unusual. He goes to all of the jewelry stores and all of the gift shops. He couldn't find it. Walked into a pet shop, and the lady talked him into buying a parrot that could speak 5 different languages. Cost $4,000. And he shipped it off to his mother on the West Coast. And on her birthday, called and said, Mom, did you get your birthday present? She said, yes, sonny, and it was delicious. Wait a minute, Mama, wait a minute, Mama. You didn't eat. Sonny, it was delicious. I said, Mama, that parrot cost $4,000 and could speak 5 different languages. She said, 5 languages? He should have said something. I know that the items that you reporters, the media, find newsworthy and enjoy writing and commenting about, in my opinion, they are primarily decisions of today, what we're voting on today. But when you analyze the budget that we reported out yesterday unanimously, I want you to take a hard look at what we think is the correct course to take, indicate some vision for the future, And I think our budget does that. Delegate Cox and I have been privileged to accompany the governor of New York in January of last year, January of this year, to meet with all of the 3 bond rating agencies. And folks, when you hear the praises, the accolades that come toward Virginia, it didn't just happen yesterday. Many of the things that we're doing in the retirement system and setting aside some money in case the federal cuts come as drastically as we're afraid they might, they applauded us for looking ahead, for the vision that we have for the future. And we have listened through the years at some of our colleagues on the other side who are always disturbed about putting bills in the drawer. You got to pay for it someday. Well, when you look at our budget, you're not going to find much of that. But take a good hard look at another budget you're going to be looking at, and you'll see a few $100 million in bills in the drawer. I just think that our approach to the budget has been a very sound, common sense, business-like crafting of a 2-year budget, and I am hoping, in spite of all of the negative stuff we're hearing from the other end, I'm hoping that we're going to go away from here with a budget, a good budget, balanced budget, and I mean structurally balanced. Anyway, I cannot say enough for all of my colleagues on the committee. They are the ones who are responsible, along with our staff, for the good parts, for the positive steps that we in the House are taking with regard to our budget. Thank you.
We have just a couple minutes remaining. I think it was important to get a lot of the substantive items out on the table. Let's take a couple questions for those who spoke on matters related to the budget. If you'd identify yourself and to whom you'd like your question addressed.
Well, the governor's budget actually required a substantial contribution from the local governments on behalf of the teachers. For every dollar we put in, local governments put in $2 in additional for teachers. So what we did, we took the House put $30 million each year towards VRS for the teacher liability. And there was about a 1.23% in the rate that VRS had. The dollars we didn't put in 11 and 12. So we said, you don't have to pay that. We're going to pay a 30 over 2 years to help buy that down. Because what we have heard, all the members, not just in the Compensation and Retirement Subcommittee, is that the fiscal stress at the local level is getting worse, not better. They're lagging us. The real estate is still, valuations are down, foreclosures, etc. So they're concerned with being able to meet their bills. We felt it was prudent to use an 8% rate instead of 7%, and then make 2 payments of 30 each, to let them be able to work their way to that full payment on behalf of the teachers. No. What has actually occurred? The rate that the teachers are paying now is about, I think, 11.4 something. This takes it to 10.2 something. Is what we said. Correct. So they're doing their full rate, but they're not doing that embedded 1.23% rate. But we're going to make a $30 million each year payment, put $60 million in over the next 2 years, which they don't have to match, which helps them tremendously. That's what we've been hearing. And then the reversion that Dr. Cox mentioned was $50 million, that put $50 or $60 million is huge as well. $60 million.
There are 3 items basically re-benchmarking that were not funded in the governor's budget. The cost of computing was one, the non-personnel inflation was the other, the federal deduct was the other. And I mean, obviously, we try to say, where do you get the most bang for your buck? Where are all localities across the state asking us to restore the most? And I can tell you that almost to a person, it was the non-inflation piece, because it runs from the school aid formula and everyone benefits from that. Now, the cost of the community is not important, but of course that is certain localities, and we just thought as we had $107, $110 million available, that was the best restoration. As I said on the floor, we certainly didn't want to go the federal deduction route, because we really felt like it was improper to re-benchmark that federal money, which we've been very clear we were not going to do. So the choices of the three, we thought that got the most bang for the buck. The second thing we felt that was very important was obviously the third grade reading initiative and fully restoring that. So that was the logic behind it.